If there's one thing that I have learned in the course of my career so far, it is that it was remarkably easy to go missing in the 1970s. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. At around 4 p.m. on Friday, October 8, 1976, the National Park Service staff at Great Smoky Mountains National Park received a report of a missing high school student who had disappeared while on a field trip. When the group from Knoxville, Tennessee's Bearden High School arrived back at the Clingmans Dome parking area to get back onto their bus, 16-year-old Trenny Gibson was not there. As far as the group's chaperones could remember, the 5'3" tall, 115-pound brunette had been somewhere in the middle of the group, so it was utterly baffling that she had managed to melt away without being seen. A search for Trenny was launched that very same day, with more intensive searches in the weekend that followed. Rangers, professional search and rescue, and even volunteers combed the trails and drainages of the park, but despite all of their efforts, no sign of Trenny Gibson could be found. Confounding everything further was a seemingly incomprehensible set of clues, and that was on top of the difficulties posed by the terrain and the weather. Clingmans Dome parking area sits just below its namesake peak at approximately 6,311 feet in elevation, with the only access points being 3 trails and 1 paved road. Those 3 trails are the Clingmans Dome bypass from the Appalachian Trail, as well as the Forney Creek and Forney Ridge trails. And it's important to understand that none of these trails hit a paved road for miles. Now, if you were to take the Appalachian Trail east from Clingmans Dome, you would run parallel to Clingmans Dome Road, which is paved, but you would remain several hundred feet above it for, again, another 1.5 miles or so before they almost meet. And yet, from there, one would still have to travel miles along either the Appalachian Trail or Clingmans Dome Road before reaching any roads that lead out of the park. And those roads still weave on for miles and miles before you get out. Now, there is of course the option of going off the beaten path, and in terms of going off the beaten path, there is no going off the beaten path. For nearly 8 miles in any direction, the rugged Appalachian wilderness surrounds the Clingmans Dome area. Navigating this terrain means climbing and descending ridge after ridge, crossing through countless creeks and ravines which cut through the landscape. So it's for good reason that people wonder not just how somebody could go missing in a place like this, but disappear from it entirely. Theories abound, from running away as a deliberate act of teenage rebellion, all the way through abduction by Bigfoot. The question is, what really happened to Trenny Gibson? But before we get into the details of today's story, this is a YouTube channel, we do take sponsors, and so I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, FlexiSpot, because I actually like today's sponsor, FlexiSpot. I like them a lot. They have been a great partner for us for a long time, and I am sitting in their C7 chair right now. In fact, we like FlexiSpot so much at the Lore Lodge that when we went and, got ourselves this big new studio and realized there was a lot of space we didn't have filled, we decided we were going to go to FlexiSpot to have them furnish the place. We are getting their E7 standing desks and their C7 chairs because they are comfortable, they are high quality, and honestly, they are a great price. I'm somebody who has a bad back from years of contact sports that I did not properly do physical therapy for, and this thing is the most comfortable office chair I've ever had, by far. I'm also one of those people who gets really irritated if the desk and the armrests aren't perfectly aligned. The nice thing about their standing desk is I can make those micro adjustments down to 1/10 of an inch. And I think that's really what it is for me, is just the amount of customization for comfort. Because to tell you the truth, while I was using the desk last night, and I love it, I was sitting in a different brand of chair, because currently we have all of these ones at the studio, and I was in that chair from around 10 p.m. to around 4:30 a.m., and my back is a mess. But when I used to do work like that in this chair, guess what? My back didn't hurt. In fact, now that I am sitting here filming for today, my back feels better just for sitting in the chair, because the lumbar support is that nice. It actually form fits your back into a healthy, comfortable position. It's also got an adjustable headrest. We have the adjustable armrests. They go up and down. I can go up and down in the seat, actually. That's not the lever I meant to pull, but it's kind of a funny thing. You can actually adjust the angle of the seat. And of course, we all like to recline, right? Well, comfy. But point is, I cannot recommend this brand highly enough. I am so comfortable every time I'm working, And I don't think that you can really undervalue a high-quality office chair. If you have an office job, if you have a job that requires you to sit, 8 to 10 hours a day, do not skimp on this. It is one of the most important purchases you can make for your long-term health. I highly recommend it. But anyway, if you would like to get your hands on one of these super comfortable, surprisingly adjustable office chairs, the C7, or the electronic adjustable standing E7 desk, you can head down to the link in the description and use code LORELodge to get 20% off your order today. And once again, we have the link down in the description. It's very easy to access right there. Just click it and Google will take you all the rest of the way. Or Brave or Yahoo, or if you're still using Yahoo, I have questions. But anyway. When Mr. Wayne Dunlap's horticulture class got off their bus at 12:30 p.m., they anticipated a relaxing day away from school, hiking amongst the beautiful landscape of the Great Smoky Mountains. Dunlap led the students out of the parking lot and then south onto the Forney Ridge Trail, towards Andrews Bald, which is a peak of about 5,920 feet, believed to have been named for Andrus Thompson, who himself may or may not have been bald. The bald part of the name comes from the fact that the area surrounding Andrews Bald is heavily forested, while Andrews Bald itself is more of a grassy knoll. It was an uneventful excursion by all accounts. The group reached their destination without issue, and they remained there until just before 2 p.m. As they returned from the Bald, Trenny was walking with two of her friends named Anita and Scott, as well as a couple of acquaintances she knew from class named Bobby and Stacy, both of whom were girls. According to Swain County Chief Deputy Bill Stiles, this little group of 4 or 5 had separated from the main body when, around 3 p.m., and about 3/4 of a mile from the Clingmans Dome parking area, most of them wanted to sit down and take a break. Trenny, however, wanted to continue onwards, with some reports suggesting that she was trying to catch up with the main group. And of course, that would suggest they weren't in the middle of the group, but rather towards the back. But whether they were at the back or the middle, and considering they were so close to the bus, it probably didn't seem like that big of a deal to let Trenny go off ahead on her own. She'd either make it to the parking area or catch up with another group of students. So Bobby, Stacy, Anita, and Scott decided that they were just going to hang out, catch their breath, and then move on when they were ready. According to a National Park Service file on the case, the group first noticed something was wrong once they arrived back at the bus around 3:30 p.m., and one name was not responding to roll call: Trenny Gibson. Immediately, Mr. Dunlap and another chaperone by the name of Danny Johnson went out to look for Trenny, assuming that she had just gotten off course a little bit, she was somewhere on one of the trails nearby, and they just needed to bring her back. Dunlap went north towards the Appalachian Trail, while Johnson went south back towards Andrews Bald and retraced their steps. Johnson found no trace of Trenny to the south, but Dunlap found shoe prints that looked like they matched the correct size, and that appeared to be sneakers like the ones that Trenny had been wearing. He followed these tracks west towards Double Springs Shelter until he lost them about half a mile past the junction of the Appalachian Trail and the Clingmans Dome bypass. At that point, Dunlap knew that this was more than he could handle alone, headed back to the parking area, and decided to contact the Rangers. Park technician Sammy Lale received Dunlap's call at 4 p.m. and then responded in person at 4:30. He assisted in checking the parking area and then, of course, the trail towards Double Springs Shelter, but had no luck of his own, came back, and they filed the official missing persons report. Lale then notified Sub-District Manager Gene Phillips of the situation, and Phillips began organizing a more intensive search. The immediate response was to call up all available National Park Service personnel, as well as the Jackson County, North Carolina Rescue Squad, to assist in what they knew had to be a very hasty search. They knew it had to be hasty because in the last 7 years, 3 young people had disappeared in the park: Dennis Martin, Jeff Haig, and Mark Hansen, and none of them were found alive. Guy Taylor, Jerry Dick, and Eugene Phillips arrived at approximately 6:30 p.m. where they began search efforts. As they drove up Clingmans Dome Road towards the Clingmans Dome parking area, they dropped off Phillips close to Mount Collins Shelter, and he went and checked up there. After establishing that she was not at Mount Collins Shelter and asking if anybody had seen her near Mount Collins Shelter, he departed back down the Appalachian Trail towards the west, headed towards Collins Gap. As he did that, Taylor and Dick drove to Clingmans Dome parking area, interviewed Mr. Dunlap, asked a few questions, and then returned to Collins Gap to retrieve Phillips. The three rangers and Mr. Dunlap then drove from Collins Gap back to the parking area where they met up with Sammy Lale as he returned from Double Springs Shelter. National Park Service personnel spoke to anybody they could find who had been on the trails or in the shelters that day, but as far as anyone could recall, they hadn't seen somebody matching Trenny's description. At 7 p.m., park staff called Frank McRain and Joni Medford, and while their association between National Park Service versus Rescue Squad is unclear, they arrived at 9 p.m. with quadrant maps of the area and the Jackson County Rescue Squad hot on their tail. And when they got to the parking area, they found Rangers Bill West and Duncan Hutchinson waiting with food and supplies. Meanwhile, the admin side was working to get as much information as they could about this incident. The Park Service contacted Bearden High School, who in turn contacted the Gibsons to ask if Trenny had come home. They were informed that she had not, and this information was relayed back to the National Park Service by a school staff member named Mrs. Baumgardner. And she said that they'd given all the information they had at the moment, but the principal would call with more information when he had it. Principal Hall followed through and called the Park Service around 8:55 that night, and all he could really tell them was that he was working to get interviews with these students and find out who had last seen Trenny, what she was doing, what information they could give. But in addition to that, he said that Trenny was a good student who was not really known to cause trouble. So this was out of character for her. At least, if she had gone off trail on purpose, it was out of character for her. In the hour that followed, rescue teams arrived, they were briefed, people got together, figured out where everybody's assignment was going to be, and then at about 10:15 p.m., the search began in earnest, with high winds, rain, and temperatures between 35 and 40 degrees. For our non-American viewers, that is just above the freezing point, and you would definitely be at risk of hypothermia due to the rain. With assignments doled out, the searchers left from Clingmans Dome with the intention of fanning out to cover as many trails as they possibly could. McRain took a team and headed down the Forney Creek Trail, and they found nothing. Lale and either a ranger or a rescueman named Vogues took their team and went to Andrews Bald, and they found nothing. Hutchinson took a team and checked Gibson's last known location, which again was some 3/4 to half a mile south along the trail from Clingmans Dome parking area, and they found nothing. George West, who is not to be confused with Bill West, and I definitely didn't make that mistake several times during the research process, took a team and searched from the Dome to Collins Gap, covering the portion of the Appalachian Trail yet to be searched. And as you can imagine, they found nothing. Guy Taylor and Bill West remained at the parking area to coordinate search efforts and remained there just in case Trenny came back, and as you can imagine, they also found nothing, which makes sense because they weren't really looking. Just like wasn't their job. So, you know what? They did their job. That's not to say the other guys didn't do their job. They did. It's just, oof. Now, I will say what struck me as a little bit odd about this section of the National Park Service file, these are handwritten notes here, is that Phillips is mentioned here, and it just says Phillips 2, and then it's blank. Everything else says so-and-so to Collins Gap, so-and-so to Andrews Bald, Phillips to White. And Phillips 2 is between the West entry and the Taylor entry. And it struck me as odd. And it would make me suspicious if it weren't for the fact that they left the Phillips 2 portion in there. If you're going to try and hide what Phillips was doing, why only redact half the line? Why not just get rid of the mention entirely or lie about what he was doing? Like I said, it's odd, but there's not enough there to speculate on what it could mean. In any case, following a rather disappointing night of searching, personnel began to leave so that they could get some rest and be prepared when they came back in the morning. There had been 19 searchers that evening, 8 of whom were National Park Service personnel, while another 10 were Jackson County Rescue Squad, and one, I believe Mr. Dunlap, was considered other or a VIP. But by 2:30 a.m., Guy Taylor, Duncan Hutchinson, and Bill West were the only ones left in the parking area, and they bedded down for the night just in case Trenny came back. The next morning, things kicked into high gear, with only the suggestion by Trenny's friends that she had tried to take a shortcut to guide them. Bright and early on Saturday morning, October 9th, 1976, rescue squads and National Park Service personnel began to trickle in. And as the numbers swelled, the 3 men who had stayed overnight were sent home so that they too could get some rest. As for those new rescue squads, they were coming in and they were coming in force. Blount County sent 20 men and a dog, while Sevier County committed 25 men and a dog of their own. And while teams were arriving, reviews of the previous day's efforts brought to light a comment from one of the male students in the group, who claimed he saw Trenny leave a trail into the undergrowth to the east. Rescue squads were briefed at 8:15 a.m. and told that they were looking for a 16-year-old girl with long brown hair and green eyes who was 5 foot 3 inches tall and 115 pounds. She would be wearing a brown plaid jacket or shirt, blue jeans, blue Adidas with crossbar and sole circle pattern, a blue and white striped sweater, and blue jeans. Mr. Dunlap also had described her to rangers as hardy, aggressive, and healthy, with acute senses, in stable mental condition, and right-handed. I do want to be clear, this was based off of essentially a checklist where he was asked to choose from multiple choices which best described her. This was not Mr. Dunlap sitting there and going, yeah, she's all of these things. It's a checklist. In addition to that, it was expected that she'd answer to a whistle or call, but she was also unfamiliar with the terrain, had very little outdoor knowledge, and had never ever been lost before. Shortly after that briefing, nurses coming in with Sevier County Medical Examiner Dr. Robert Lash arrived at 8:30 p.m. and set up their facilities in the men's restroom. Dr. Lash had also been involved in Mark Hansen's disappearance a year earlier as the county coroner. Further rescue squads from Tennessee and North Carolina continued to arrive until 9 o'clock a.m., at which point the crews were dispatched to their respective search areas. The search was to cover the trails from the Dome parking area to Andrews Bald, as well as some of the Forney Creek Trail. The road to the Dome parking area was closed, and Frank McGrain was stationed there to make sure that nobody who was not authorized to actually be involved in the search came through. Sammy Lale took Jan Dick, Rennell Sheridan, and tracker Lenny Garver to the upper side of Andrews Bald, while Harold Wood, John Batzer, and tracker J.R. Buchanan covered the lower side of the trail. Jerry Dick and Robbie Robinson arrived at 9:25 a.m., and Robinson went out with Bruce Umstead and one of the dogs, while Dick went out with H.E. Biddle and Jim Stafford, taking another dog. I believe it's a little unclear. There were either 2 or 4 dogs involved this day. I should also take a moment to mention that while dogs are a very important and standard part of search and rescue operations, they are not 100% accurate every time. They do sometimes follow the wrong trail, they sometimes fail to pick up a scent, but in general, they are still considered to be a useful guide for where to start a search. Point of the matter is, just because a dog goes a certain direction does not necessarily mean the person did. As the dog and tracker teams went out and searched, Guy Taylor called in at 10:05 a.m. to alert the headquarters that Haywood County Rescue Squad, as well as 50 volunteers, were on their way, despite having been warned about the bad weather. And that bad weather was once again in the 30s, cold with intermittent rains. Now, while most of this search was being coordinated by the National Park Service, Swain County Search and Rescue were operating on their own without any supervision in the Noland Creek area, towards the lower end of that drainage. To be clear, when I say that they were operating without National Park supervision, I don't mean they were operating without National Park permission. They were actually being allowed to search areas like Mill Creek, but they were not being directed by rangers. Back up in the more immediate area of Trenny's disappearance, however, one of the search dogs picked up a scent near Andrews Bald around 10:30 a.m. The dog followed that scent towards the Forney Creek Trail, prompting the searchers to divert another dog to the same area at 11 a.m. And as those dogs searched Forney Creek, other crews made it to the lowest point of the search area at 10:35 a.m. and began working their way back up to Clingmans Dome. And at this point, the weather was beginning to take a toll, with 9 searchers sent back to the Clingmans Dome parking area to seek medical attention due to illnesses brought on by the cold and wet conditions. But thankfully, they were receiving reinforcements. Thankfully, reinforcements were on the way in, with an Army Air Rescue team commanded by Jerry McFarland arriving at 10:45 a.m., and Park Service Rangers Ronnie Click and Dwight McCarter, who we recognize from a couple of these other cases, following not far behind. Along with these additional men, a 20-man platoon from the United States Marine Corps 4th Engineering Battalion arrived at 11:15 a.m., but they were not properly dressed for the cold. Thankfully, Lash was able to clear them, but only for a short time. But it did seem that each step forward was being met with another step back. As Sammy Lale's group arrived back at the Dome parking area around 11:40 a.m., helicopters were being grounded because the weather was getting even worse. More rangers were en route by 12 p.m., and a note from 12:15 a.m. reports Wood's team out. And if we're going with the language used throughout the reports, this means they were activated to the search area and likely to replace some of the Tennessee squads that had been out since the morning. And yes, I hear there's a siren behind me. At 12:45 p.m., those units were released to get meals and head home, with instructions to return by 7 a.m. if Trenny was not found that night. At 2 p.m., Ronnie Click and Dwight McCarter, who unfortunately did not write an entry in his book about this case, took the AT to Goshen Trail to Elkmont, but shortly after that, Umstead and Robinson's bloodhound caught something very important. As they took their dog around the Clingmans Dome Tower area, it alerted to a scent. The dog followed that scent for about 1.5 miles east towards Collins Gap, and then diverted down towards Clingmans Dome Road. And then, as the dog made it to the road, it lost the scent. And then just a few minutes later, rangers received a report of a girl who was crying as she walked along Little River Road. A ranger, however, reported that he had just been driving on Little River Road and had seen no girl, and that he was 5 miles east of the Y. Now, this is not a YMCA. I believe, based on the location, that he means the Townsend Y, spelled W-Y-E, but without any further info, it's hard to say exactly what he meant, exactly where he was, and where the girl had been spotted. We also don't know if he'd driven the entirety of the road, or if he just hadn't seen her on the portion of the road he was on. As search efforts on the ground tried to figure out where they should even be looking for Trenny, helicopters were able to get off the ground again, heading from Sugarlands down to Cades Cove, from where they'd be dispatched to check on the North Carolina side of the park. Haywood County Rescue Squad arrived shortly after that, while a Ned Allison checked a water pumping station that I could not locate. And as these groups worked, a team led by an Ed Bailey did a line search of the Clingmans Dome area between the trail and the road, where they found a shoe print. Not long after that, around 3 p.m., Anderson and West Buncombe County Rescue Squads arrived and were sent to do a line search, though the exact location is not made clear. It just says that they were sent to the second search pattern. And I know that this is a lot of different things going on at once, but I tried to do this in chronological order because it was the best way to make it make sense given how little specific information there is about any given team. There's no, this team did this, and this, and this team did this, and this. It's just hour by hour, minute by minute. And also, they don't use a ton of names. They mostly use people's numbers, and they give no key for whose number is which. But in any case, at this same time, around 3 p.m., a dog was sent to once again check the route towards Double Springs, but it did not alert on the print found by Bailey, and it didn't seem to track anything down to the west. Half an hour later, around 3:35 p.m., Skyland Search and Rescue arrived, with Weaverville and Fairview rescue squads dispatched to Sector B, though what Sector B is once again not in the files. The rescue squads that had come in during mid-morning to relieve those from Tennessee who had been there since 7 a.m. began to return from their line searches at 4:15 p.m. and were released as they arrived. At 4:40 p.m., and I'm going to assume that these guys are either the North Carolina rescue squads that had just arrived, or that they are National Park Service personnel, Jason Hook and John started down Clingmans Creek, while a Bill Acree headed down Salola Creek. Those three men planned to join up at Nolan Creek Trail and then stay the night. Back up near Clingmans Dome, Guy Taylor and Bill West arrived back at the parking area around 5:10 p.m., and shortly after that, another call came in from one of Trenny's classmates, this one named Lisa Michael. Now, as far as I can tell, Lisa Michael was not actually part of the group that Trenny was with. She seems to have been a little bit further back, maybe as part of a different group. And that would now suggest that Trenny actually was in the middle. Or at the very least, she was neither at the very back nor the very front of the school group. In any case, Lisa said that she last saw Trenny a mile from the parking area with Stacy Martin, Anita Bounds, and Bobby Kogel, and that when they all stopped to rest, she had continued onward. She said that she had lost sight of the missing girl as she had rounded a bend in the trail ahead of her. Further information became available as the evening went on, with the results of interviews coming in from other students. Two friends of hers who had seen her most recently told rangers that the three of them were almost to the parking area when the two speaking to the rangers sat down to rest and Trenny continued onward. One of those students had told Mrs. Baumgardner that Trenny seemed to be in a hurry to get back, hence why she didn't stop with the rest of them. Anita Bounds specifically said that she was with Trenny Gibson, Scott Troy, and Bobby Kogel, and all but Trenny decided to take a break. And then Trenny was on the trail one moment and gone the next. And here the report includes something important, because while I was having a hard time determining exactly where Trenny disappeared, the rangers were there, and the rangers were able to ask specific questions. And as far as the report was concerned, from where they said Trenny was last seen, if she had remained on the trail, they would have been able to see her, which means if they lost sight of her, she left the trail. And that tracked with what Bobby Kogel's interview said. because she said that she was behind 2 other girls on the trail when Trenny caught up with Anita and Scott, and that she walked with them for a while before stopping to rest as well. Now, what I mean is that Bobby walked with the rest of the group. She said she didn't know Trenny very well, they just had class together, but she walked with Anita, Trenny, and Scott, probably also Stacy Martin, and that Bobby stopped to rest with the group. Trenny did not. She said that it appeared as though Trenny had stopped a little further up the trail, bent over, and then made a right turn off. Rangers checked that spot where Trenny's friends suggested she had left the trail and found it rather unbelievable that she could have done that. As for the location, which again I can't say for sure and Google Maps does not let me get close enough to really tell for certain, the group had just passed a large, long, flat rock on the right side of the trail along the top of the ridge, and Trenny was last seen just above that point. The reason that the Rangers found it unbelievable she could have left there is that not only was this a very rough and dense area full of trees and rocks, but also it's a pretty steep slope. It certainly wasn't the kind of thing where you could accidentally find yourself going off trail. But in addition to that, it was hard for them to comprehend why she would have deliberately done so, because this would not have been a shortcut. This would not have led her back to the Clingmans Dome parking area. She would have had to go downhill and then back uphill. It would have been considerably more difficult. And if you are in the area, I was able to go and use Google Street View a little bit, you can tell walking along that area, you're not going to be able to make the shortcut that was being suggested. This could not have been a case of her just thinking there was a path. There was definitely no path. But this version of events, however unlikely it may have seemed, also matched with what the male student quoted earlier had told them. And given that the information given by the male student matched that given by Bobby Kogel, I'm going to go ahead and wager that it was probably Scott Troy giving them the information. At the very least, it was a clue, but not one that told them very much. So, around 8 p.m., the search closed down and people started to file out so that they could get rest for the next morning. As far as what the day brought to the search, it wasn't much. They considered it to have negative results, and the only real guiding light here, the only thing that kept them hopeful, was that the dogs had caught a scent. The search was back on less than 12 hours later on the morning of October 10th, 1976, with Assistant Chief Linehan, Dr. Lash, and Air Rescue briefing the searchers at headquarters at 7:30 a.m. Then everyone went up to the Clingmans Dome parking area about an hour later. Helicopters started flying sweep searches half an hour after that, while Frank McGrain and the Swain County Rescue Squad worked the lower end of Noland and Forney Creeks. Mike Dennis and Duncan Holler took a group of 20 volunteers from the nearby 20-mile area down Forney Creek at 9:50 a.m., with all teams present in the search area by 10 a.m. And for the first time since Trenny had gone missing, a full-scale air search was viable, and they had at least 4 helicopters in the air by 11. On the ground, search teams fanned out to check the areas off-trail, considering that the trails had now been very well combed, and they also reached out to the FBI to ask about a dog. At this point, they were operating in 5 search teams, and Team 1 took the southwest side of Clingman Creek, and Team 2 took the east side. Team 3 took the sides of Andrews Bald, while Team 4 searched between the Appalachian Trail and Forney Creek Trail, and Team 5 went from the Dome parking area to Collins Gap on the north side of the road. Dogs were sent out to Andrews Bald as well as to the Appalachian Trail to once again check that section between Clingmans Dome Tower and Collins Gap. The dogs that performed the latter search returned around 1 p.m., and it was reported that they followed nearly the exact same pattern as the dogs the day before. Later that night, a Mount Juliet man named Jim Sands volunteered his dog, and once again, it followed the Appalachian Trail from Clingmans Dome to Collins Gap and then down to the road. And then 20 minutes later, the searchers cleared out of the area and day 2 of the search was put to rest. On the morning of October 11th, personnel arrived at the Dome parking area at 8 a.m. with plans to increase efforts in certain parts of the search area. Specifically, they wanted to check below Andrews Bald, between Clingmans Dome Road and the pumping station, and between Clingmans Dome Tower and the parking area. All crews were dispatched at 9 a.m., or at least as far as the National Park Service thought. As it turns out, Swain County Civil Air Patrol was on hand and ready to assist with 40 men, 2 doctors, 14 pilots, and 5 planes. But the National Park Service failed to coordinate with them, and because they were kind of unable to just stand around all day waiting, they had to go home. And this deprived the search effort of considerable resources. That would have nearly doubled the professional aspect of the search. Back on the mountain, however, a German Shepherd by the name of J. Edgar, which makes me think it was probably the FBI's dog, handled by Jeff Sellers, Wayne Patterson, and Jim Ankers, checked along the Appalachian Trail at 10:15 a.m., and wouldn't you know it, it went from Clingmans Dome Tower to Collins Gap and then down to the road. The document even notes, all dogs prove positive along Appalachian Trail to Collins Gap, which seems like more than a coincidence. This time, however, the dog didn't just follow the scent out and down to the road. It followed it to the center of the road and then another 200 yards further away from the parking area along the road. And that direction the dog was taking them went to another parking area. However, the dog did lose the scent in the middle of the road. Helicopters hit the skies at 11 a.m., but they found nothing, and it seems that most of their utility during this search effort was ferrying people around. Speaking of which, there was actually quite a bit of ferrying going on, with the Red Cross and Gatlinburg Fire Department working in tandem to provide food and supplies to the searchers on the mountain. Unfortunately, no amount of searching seemed to be enough to track down Trenny, who, if the dogs were actually following the right trail, probably wasn't even in the park. And it seems that the rangers may have understood this, and may have kind of had the same feeling, that if Trenny were still alive, she had to be somewhere else. So, at 4:30 p.m., all rescue squads were sent home and told not to come back unless they received a call from their coordinators. Shortly after the rescue squads were sent home, I believe Bill West took a dog team out to Collins Gap one last time at 5:15 p.m. And when he returned to the parking area at 7 p.m., he reported that just like the last 4 dogs, his dog had tracked out to Collins Gap, down to Clingmans Dome Road, and then lost the scent. Whatever had happened to Trenny, the search effort was floundering, and the Park Service knew their only chance of finding her alive after several days in the cold and rain was if she had made it out of the park. By the morning of October 12th, the searchers absolutely knew that the chances of finding Trenny alive inside the park were slim, but that didn't mean they were going to give up looking. 3 crews checked the Forney Creek drainage again, down the Forney Ridge Trail, down the Nolan Creek Trail, as well as road prong to Chimney Tops. What everyone hoped for, however, was that a message would come in that she'd turned up at a hospital or a shelter, and a few leads of that nature did come in. One of those was from the Swain County Sheriff's Office, who reported that a young couple had come into Bryson City to get married on Saturday, and that the girl was underage. She matched the description, about 5'3", 115 to 120 pounds, sandy brown or blonde hair, and said that she was a 17-year-old girl named Alice Marie Plummer. Now, I looked into it, and I was not able to find an Alice Marie Plummer who got married in that county in that year, but in the end it didn't matter. A photo of Trenny was shown to the Sheriff's Department in Bryson City, and it seemed that it was not the correct girl. Another report came in from Newfound Gap of a girl who appeared to be 14 or so, with her face scratched up, a dazed look in her eyes, and she was wearing a brown corduroy jacket with a hood, as well as jeans. Unfortunately, the report also noted that it seemed to be the wrong kind of jeans, and that she seemed too clean and too dry to be Trenny. They believed it to be a negative match, but they didn't actually check any further. But not all tips were so innocuous as this, including one submitted by a Christine Cromwell, who actually called in from the Bahamas. Cromwell said that she had seen Trenny at the Newark airport with an older, heavy-set man wearing green trousers, and that they got off their plane at Nassau in the Bahamas at 11:30 p.m. From what I can tell, it seems that she was on the plane with them, but the wording was a little weird. But the one that really caught my eye here came in from a Blanche Cooper of Gatlinburg. She said that she had seen a young girl matching Trenny's description walking along River Road in Gatlinburg either Friday or Saturday. She was reportedly wearing a brown plaid jacket, flared blue jeans, and white tennis shoes, but the report says it wasn't Gibson and does not explain why, which drives me absolutely insane. It's not a perfect match, but it's damn close. Trenny was known to have been wearing a brown plaid shirt, blue jeans, and while she was wearing blue Adidas, those have white stripes, and if you're going by memory, you might have remembered the shoes as white. In addition to that, they had received a tip about a girl crying walking along Little River Road, but wrote it off because a ranger hadn't seen her. Cooper's report said River Road, and you have to ask if it's possible that somebody misrecorded the original tip because there is no River Road in the park. It's entirely too possible that the first tip said River Road and that it meant River Road in Gatlinburg because that is accessible via the exact same fork you take to get to Little River Road coming out of the park. Obviously, I'm not certain that that's what happened, but it does bug me that nobody considered the possibility. In any case, the search closed for the day with no further movement, and the chances of finding Trenny alive were growing more and more slim. By the morning of Tuesday, October 13th, the search was winding down inside the park, as efforts shifted to trying to find the girl somewhere outside of the original search area. Still, teams did spend the day searching the Collins Gap area, where Trenny may have been picked up from the road. That's where the focus was, and tips were still rolling in from the surrounding counties, as well as the astral plane. A psychic in Nashville by the name of Cecil Thomas said he'd had a vision of where Trenny was, and that she was still alive or else frozen in a sitting position. Searchers were supposedly very close, but needed to search a little to the left, near the mouth of a creek. I'm not sure what a little to the left means. I guess west. Anyway, they would find her sitting in a hollow in what might be a bear den or something, in a rocky area without a lot of undergrowth, and several very old and large trees. The sun would be shining down directly through a light layer of fog, also there would be lots of squirrels eating acorns. As you can imagine, this was taken very lightly because neither bear den or something nor a little to the left are very specific. At any given time in the Great Smoky Mountains, you're probably near a bear den or something, and unless you know which direction someone's headed, a little to the left means nothing. I will sit here and I will tell you there are a few cases that it seems like psychics may have helped to solve. I know Missing Enigma just did a video on a case that involved psychics as well, but what bugs me is when psychics come in and give information that is not only unhelpful, but in fact actively harmful to the case. Other tips, however, were less fanciful and more on the concerning side. The Gatlinburg PD received a fax regarding an unidentified homicide victim in North Carolina, aged 18 years with medium reddish hair, green eyes, freckles, and a 3-inch scar on her abdomen. She, however, had poor teeth, a tattoo of a cross on her chest, wore size 7 shoes, and rust-colored denim pants. A tragedy, but not Gibson. Another call came in from a Joe Bridges at the Haywood County, North Carolina Sheriff's Office in Waynesville, informing them that a Waynesville hospital thought they may have treated Trenny on Friday night. A female had come into the emergency room with 4 male companions, giving her name as Rita K. Lanning, father Fred, address Canton, North Carolina, age 18 years. The nurses thought that she seemed upset and a little confused, and so they asked her for her home phone number. But when the nurses asked for this information, one of the girl's fellows, as it's put in the report, said that she might not remember it because she was from out of state. The red flag that got the hospital staff thinking something might be up with this, aside from the fact that this girl just walked in with 4 men who were speaking for her, was that they had just given her address as being Canton, North Carolina, and they were in Waynesville, North Carolina. So she was not from out of state. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could really do because she was 18 and she was not asking for help, so they treated her for minor cuts and bruises and released her the same night. But when the nurses found out about Trenny Gibson, they thought maybe this was her. She matches the description. Bridges was dispatched to the hospital, but after showing pictures of Trenny around, the nurses said that, unfortunately, it wasn't her. As it turned out, she was in fact a local girl, but I do think chances are high that she also needed help. As a little aside here, if you think that somebody is being trafficked or is being held against their will, there are things you can do. It is good to try and help, but there are proper ways to go about it, and you should never approach somebody and start a conflict, start an altercation over it. First of all, because you may be wrong, and second of all, because it may lead to consequences for that person once you're no longer there. Last summer, after the movie Sound of Freedom came out, we did a video that was about the child trafficking situation, what goes into it, and how you should approach these situations. Towards the last third or so of that video, we go over the statistics, what the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says you should do, what other advocate groups say you should do, things like that. If you're interested in learning more about how to handle encountering what you believe may be human trafficking, I recommend at least going and reading through the sources of that video. I do want to say, regardless of how you feel about the film, about the people who made the film, whether you're pro or against, we tried to make that video as neutral and fact-based as possible, and I want to emphasize that our intention with that video was to give people information and resources regarding child trafficking. It's not intended to make a political statement in either direction. It's just, hey, here's the facts, here's what you can do about it. The next tip to come in for this specific case, however, was from the North Carolina State Highway Patrol in Asheville, who received a call from the Salisbury office of the same organization. This call informed him that a Michael Venters from Charlotte said that he might have information on the missing girl. He'd been in the park Saturday at the Lufty Visitor Center, and a ranger told them that they could see a waterfall if they went towards a tribal-owned campground. Asked which campground specifically, he said he could not recall, but that it was on Big Cove Road. He said that he and whomever he was with had hiked up out of the campground and to the waterfall, and on their way out saw a young Indian man about 18 years old with a gun. He had two girls with him who looked scared, and he thought one may be Trenny Gibson. But he also said that he would not be able to identify Trenny Gibson if shown a picture, so I wouldn't call him a reliable witness. Big Cove Road is also a very long way from the Lufty Visitor Center and not really the kind of place you'd hike to from deep within the park. And the closest thing I could find to a waterfall in the area was definitely not worth that kind of a trek. I mean, we're talking like 16 miles there and back. And on top of that, the town it was in is Cherokee, which is Cherokee territory, so it would make sense that you would see a young Native American man. And then it was October 14th. The only meaningful thing to come out of that day's search was a tip from a Tony Douglas of Lexington, Tennessee. And Douglas said that a girl came into Burger Shake at Crossroads near Lexington while hitchhiking I-40 with a trucker, and she wanted that trucker to take her out of state. The trucker refused because he probably was aware that trafficking minors across state lines comes with hefty penalties. And when she persisted and kept asking him, hey, take me across state lines, hey, take me across state lines, he made the sensible decision and called the sheriff. By the time the sheriff could get there, however, the girl had disappeared, just run off. She was reportedly wearing jeans, a yellow pullover, a light-colored sweater, and had dull blonde hair. There is no follow-up to this, so I assume that either they couldn't locate her or that they followed up and she wasn't a match. And the rest of the search was rather uneventful. On the 15th, they checked from Collins Gap to half a mile west of Fork Ridge Trail on both sides of the ridge. They also checked the headwaters of Beach Flats Creek from the pumping station to Lufty Overlook, and from half a mile west of the Fork Ridge Trail to the junction with Newfound Gap Road. And on the 16th, they checked the drainage of the right-hand fork of Steel Trap Creek, while the next day they hit the Fork Ridge Trail, and the following day they checked the Tennessee side of the mountain range along the Appalachian Trail west of Double Springs. All told, they covered not a 10 square mile search area, but a 10-mile radius around Clingmans Dome Tower. They checked trails, they checked shelters, they checked drainages, they checked caves, they checked ravines, and absolutely nothing of Trenny Gibson could be found. The only hint, the only clue to her movement that day was that scent trail from Clingmans Dome Tower to Collins Gap. And the frustrating part about that is if she left the trail where her friends say they saw her leave the trail, it's really inexplicable that she could have gotten to Clingmans Dome Tower without being seen. And this leaves me with a lot of questions, and honestly a lot more questions than either of the two cases we've covered in this cluster so far. Mark Hansen and Jeff Haig, it seems most likely that bad decisions were made either by them or by the people that they were with. They tried to get somewhere safe, and they unfortunately froze to death. In those two cases, there is a perfectly mundane explanation that you can trace from point A to point B to point C until you figure out what ultimately happened. There's no reason to necessarily believe that these were mysterious or paranormal. Foul play might be considered, but at the end of the day, they were found, and you can kind of put the pieces together. But with Trenny Gibson, there is a massive gap between where she's last seen and where the dogs picked up her trail. Once again, there were two spots where the dogs thought they might have scented Trenny. Those were the Forney Creek Trail and the Appalachian Trail. But the thing is, she went missing dead between them. So that leads to a whole bunch of questions. And I think the first is, how did her scent get to the Appalachian Trail if she was never seen at the Appalachian Trail? And keep in mind, Clingmans Dome Tower is a tourist destination. There are rangers there. There are people there. You would expect that somebody would have seen her if she walked up that way. And if she did walk ahead of her friends, there was another school group ahead of her, which means that in order to get to Clingmans Dome Tower, she would have had to walk past them. And that's my second question is, how could she have gone off trail where they suggested she did without being seen further up? The one thing that occurs to me is that she could have stepped off the trail and hid in the brush until everybody passed by, and then continued walking, but for what purpose? One possibility is that she didn't step off the trail there at all, and that Her friends were with her the whole time because they were somehow involved in her disappearance. There's a number of ways that that could manifest. It could have been some kind of teenage rivalry, but in that case, you would think that she would have either made her way back to the trail or, if she was hurt, found near it. Which suggests to me the other possible option of she went off trail deliberately, waited until everybody had passed, and then headed up on her own. But again, for what purpose? So far as any reports suggested, she was happy with her home life, she was a good student, she had a bright future ahead of her, her family seems to have been decently well off, and she had $1,200 in a checking account. Or $200 in cash and $1,000 in a savings account. Point is, things were going well for her. Back then, that's a lot of money. That's like $6,000 in today's money. And she just left it at home. So if she was gonna run away, you would expect her to empty her bank account or at least take that $200 in cash with her. So if she wasn't running away because she was unhappy with her home life and she did intend to disappear, there's not a ton of possibilities. And I think the most obvious one is the most teenage one. She might have run off with a boy. Whoever that boy was, if he existed, certainly could not have been a member of the group that day because all the other people were accounted for. And confusingly, her parents are very certain that she did not date. It is, of course, possible that she did date and they just didn't know about it, but in that case, who? There are a number of reasons that a 16-year-old girl, especially in 1976, might not want to tell her parents that she has a boyfriend, but the one that sticks out and the one that seems to make the most sense given the situation at hand, that the scent trail suggests she made her way out to Collins Gap and then down to the road and then she disappears, I do wonder if maybe she ran off with an older man. And I'm not gonna blame her for that because older men are well aware they should not be dating 16-year-old girls. Maybe they weren't as aware of that in 1976 because the 70s were a very strange time, but you could know better. And if you knew that this was probably not something that was going to be popular with your underage girlfriend's parents, you might tell her not to tell her parents. But of course, this seems like a lot of speculation, right? I mean, there's no evidence that she ran off with somebody. Except there was one thing that stuck out in a news report to me, which is, over the summer, Trenny worked a job at a cafeteria, and minimum wage back then was about $2.30. And if we're going to assume, coming from Knoxville, Tennessee, she was probably making minimum wage, that's not going to make you a ton of money. In fact, if you were to try to, say, buy a $600 star sapphire ring that you were wearing the day you went missing, you'd need to work for about 6.5 weeks. And then you'd need to spend all of the money you earned in that 6.5 weeks, the equivalent of $3,300 in today's money, to buy a ring. And you know, what possible reason could a 16-year-old girl who is kind of a bookworm and doesn't date have to own an expensive piece of jewelry? Now, I have younger sisters. They've both been 16. I cannot see either of them, even the one who's the more girly of the two, spending $3,000 on a ring. But what I could see is a guy who's interested in one of them doing that. I could see a man who's a little bit older, maybe has a full-time job, and wants this girl to stick with him, going ahead and doing something that extravagant. Because 16-year-old girls are susceptible to that kind of thing. When you're inexperienced in the dating pool, when you, never have had a boyfriend, the guy who showers you with affection and seems safe and has a stable job and is buying you nice things might seem like a good idea. And he might seem like such a good idea that you're willing to run away with him. So I have to wonder, did she actually not date? Or did her parents just not know that she had a boyfriend? But of course, that is very much a lot of speculation. I will say, her family strongly believed that foul play was somehow involved here, that she was abducted, and their reasoning for this was that a couple of years earlier, Mrs. Gibson, I believe her name was Hope, had actually shot a young boy who tried to break into their home to see Trenny. Now, he survived. He wasn't fatally shot. It doesn't say what she shot him with, but apparently, as he was running away, he yelled that he would kill Trenny. And this is what seemed to have her father, Bob Gibson, the most concerned, was did this boy know she was going to be on that field trip? Did he make his way up there? And did he wait for just the right moment to snag her off the trail? Could Trenny Gibson have been abducted? But of course, if that is the case, was this boy waiting along the side of the trail? And if so, how was he not heard? How was she not heard? How did nobody notice that this was happening? He either would have had to have walked all the way up there and then walked into the woods, or he would have had to have driven up there and gotten her into a car, in which case she would have been seen. And if he had gone up there, waited, taken her off the trail, and harmed her, he would have had to carry her 10 miles away, or at the very least into a place that wasn't going to be easily accessible to searchers, and then climb out himself. Now there is one last thing here that because so many people mentioned it in our podcast from the night before we shot this episode, I want to bring up. And it is that people often tell me I am too critical of David Paulides, and that all of my videos are just David Paulides hit pieces. If you'll notice, I haven't mentioned the guy once yet, this video. Not once. David Paulides includes an anecdote from a kid named Robert Simpson who says that he had stopped to track a bear just before Trenny went missing. And that, he heard the bear. He didn't see the bear, I think it was. And then Paulides suggests that if Trenny had been taken by a bear, and this is where I get upset with people who say he never says it's Bigfoot. Paulides says that if she had been taken by a bear, there would have been blood and screams and signs of a struggle, and he's right. He's right about that. Bears are violent when they kill you. They don't even wait until you're dead to eat you. And the implication here, based on a lot of other things David Paulides has said in his books and his movies and his YouTube channel, is that this bear was not a bear at all, but it was a man who was hairy, a large man who was hairy, who might have big feet, you might say. Now, why does that bother me? It's not because there's no Bigfoot legends from the Appalachians. There sure as hell are. Wendigoon scared the hell out of us when we were down there a couple of years ago telling us about the tree man. And then I heard weird hoops and knocking outside, which may or may not have been him. He seemed very serious. He did not seem to be joking around when I asked him about it, but maybe he's just really good at acting. So it's not that I don't see any possibility of like feral people or what you might call Bigfoot. Please go watch our videos on what we think Bigfoot would be before you assume that we're insane. We've been doing this a while now. In any case, the reason that I'm frustrated with Paulides for this statement is that he says his results here, the research he used to write this entry in Missing 411 Eastern United States, came from the exact same box of files I have. And you know what's not in that box of files? The name Robert Simpson. There was no Robert Simpson. There's no Robert Simpson in any of the news articles. There's no Robert Simpson in any of the National Park Service reports. There's no Robert Simpson that I can find who was even in the group that day. I'm not sure a Robert Simpson was at her school. But anyway, my point in doing this series is not to speak ill of David Paulides. It's not even to prove him wrong. It's just to look into these cases and see what the truth was, if I can find it, or if there really is a reason to think they're mysterious, if there is a connection between certain things. Because whether it is Bigfoot or a serial killer, that is something important to know about. And at the very least, these are case studies in how not to behave on the Appalachian Trail. Do not separate from your friends. Do not go off trail if you feel like you're lost. Stay with people, and if you can't do that, stay put and wait for rescue. The only time you should ever leave the trail is if you are in immediate danger. I will say that right now, I am of the opinion that Trenny Gibson most likely deliberately left the park. I think that the outcome that makes the most sense here is that she went off trail, waited in the brush, and then once everybody had passed, she made her way up, passed around Clingmans Dome, went out to the road at Collins Gap, and then hopped into a car somewhere to hitchhike away. I think the most plausible reason for this is either that her home life was not as good as the papers and the Park Service were left to believe, or possibly that she was meeting up with a boy, possibly the boy who gave her this ring, because again, I really find it hard to believe that she would spend $3,300 on a star sapphire ring. Maybe she would, maybe I am making a mountain out of a molehill there, it just seems like a really odd decision, but either way, the whole thing seems odd. And I do think that the most likely thing here is she disappeared deliberately to go be with a boy. And I think that is based on the fact that she's never turned up and that her parents were still looking for her in 1991. I think it's most likely that something bad happened. So the advice I would give here, is don't run off with strange men. I know that would seem like it's rather self-explanatory, but I've been a teenager. I haven't been a teenage girl, but I have been a teenage boy, and I know that your hormones make you very stupid sometimes. As I always say, if you think there's something I missed, if you think that I got something wrong, if there is more information out there that you think I could have included, please let me know. Please let me know if I mispronounced anything. If there's any suggestions you have that we should look into for this cluster, maybe that aren't mentioned in the books. let me know. And I think next week we're going to be going back in time a little bit in the Great Smokies. So we're going to be going back to some of the earliest cases Paulides includes in his book from this region. And for those of you that love the history segment, it'll be back in that video. And with all of that said, if you like what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can support us by becoming a member of this channel for $1 or by joining our Patreon for $1. Either one will get you access to monthly posts of the notes and sources for these videos, as well as a transcript, and our Liquored Lore show, which is live usually the last Saturday of the month. But I think this month it's a pre-recorded, right, Aiden? Yeah. Yes, it's a pre-recorded anniversary special. If you saw the anniversary special that went up on the actual channel, imagine that with alcohol and more people. It's also a great opportunity to meet some of the new people we're bringing onto the channel, as well as some of the behind-the-scenes guys. And our girlfriends. You can also support us by checking out our coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. It is delicious. I designed it myself. I drink it every morning. I cannot highly recommend it enough. I was a barista at an artisan roastery for years and know what I'm doing, and you will appreciate it. You will also very soon be able to get our merch from Bunker Branding. I mean, very soon. I think we've approved all the designs now, right? That's what okay, we have a meeting tomorrow. Or if you're watching this on Friday, we have a meeting 3 days ago. Nah. So yeah, soon you'll be able to wear the Lodge while you drink the Lodge. And if you want to see more Lodge, you can head over to the Weird Bible, check out the History Hut. We also have my personal channel, Aiden Mattis, where I do gaming, reaction, commentary, and you know, some music even. It's just kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet of content over there. We also do a live show Sundays at 7 p.m. where we talk about these cases in a more conversational format, and every other week we have a guest on to talk about either something that is related to our field or a specific case that we've both looked at. You can also catch that podcast on any streaming platform you want. We post them everywhere. And the last thing I will tell you is you should check out our Discord. It is bit.ly/jointhelodge, and that is where you will get the first update on everything we do. That is the most consistently updated platform we have. That is the best place to be if you want to make sure you understand everything that's going on. Yeah, so anyway, with all that said, I'm Aiden Mattis, this is Archie, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.